Okay, we will go ahead and get started. All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you all for attending the first Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting for the Division 85 rules relating to permitting and mitigation in Oregon's wetlands and waters. My name is Madeline Kane. I'm a facilitator with Kearns and West, and I'll be helping to facilitate these meetings and the process alongside the Department of State land staff. I'm joined today by my colleague Maria, who will be supporting the meeting and taking notes. As a quick reminder, you should have just heard the notice, but this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the DSL rulemaking page. Today's meeting is really an orientation to the rulemaking process and the current set of and the content of the rulemaking, so that RAC members can have the background and information that they'll need to participate in these meetings. We've built in several breaks for questions, so you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions you have as we're going through the content. In future RAC meetings, there'll be opportunities for you to provide more feedback on the draft rule language, but today's session is really dedicated to building a sort of a shared base level of understanding. As a sort of quick note on participation today, as this is a rules advisory committee meeting, we're really going to be looking mostly to RAC members for their contributions during the questions and feedback sections, during our poll, and for any comments or questions in the chat. For non-RAC members or interested parties, we have dedicated some time later today for you to share your comments. So we're asking you please stay in listening mode until that time. So we're going to get started today with intros. We'll start with the DSL project team, then RAC members, and then we have some agency advisors present today too. For DSL staff members, we're asking that you just do a quick intro of your name and the role on the project. And for RAC members and advisors, we're asking that you share your name, your affiliation, and anything else that you think is important in sort of ways of intro this morning. I'll call on you and we'll get started with DSL. So we'll start today with Danielle. Danielle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Boudreau. I'm the department's rulemaking coordinator. RAC members, you saw my name on the invites to you. My role with the RAC meetings is to do a lot of tech support and grunt work. But basically, I shepherd the rules along from when the rules writers are drafting to when we can adopt them. So if you have any questions about the rulemaking process, I'm the person to ask.
Thanks, Danielle. Then we'll go Gray and then Melody.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Gray Wolf. I'm one of our mitigation specialists for the Department of State Lands. I'm one of the subject matter experts for mitigation relating to this rulemaking. And then I'll hand it over to Melody. So if you have questions about what we're talking about, bounce them off myself or Melody. Melody, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mel Rodenko. I am the other mitigation specialist and subject matter expert for the mitigation changes we're making to the rules. And Gray and I are the leads at DSL for the rulemaking. And we have some other staff that are helping with the non-mitigation topics for this rulemaking.
So much, Melody. Okay, we'll go to RAC members. I'll call out your name and just a reminder, your name and affiliation and anything else you think is sort of pertinent to today's intros. We'll start with Becky, then we'll go Becky Krieg, Brad Livingston, and Brian Cook.
Hi, I'm Becky Craig, and I'm representing the Wetlands Conservancy, and I'm a former administrator of Water Resources Department.
Thanks, Becky. Welcome. Brad, then Brian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Livingston. I'm statewide wetlands program coordinator for the Department of Transportation.
Brian.
Apologize for the delay. Brian Cook with Clean Water Services in Washington County, the Capital Permitting Program Manager.
Great, welcome. Okay, let's see. We'll do Dana Kurtz, Emily Alcott, and Jesse Steele.
Dana was not able to attend today, so I'm here in her place. Sue Brady, we're both with Anderson Perry, which is an engineering consulting firm. We also do natural resource projects. So yeah, we do permitting, wetlands, ESA, all the things.
Thanks so much, Sue, and sorry for forgetting, but thank you for
That's
being
okay.
here. It looks like I don't think Emily's joined us yet or is going to join us today, so we'll go to Jesse and then Jonas.
Good morning. My name is Jesse Steele. I'm the executive director at the Grand Ronde Model Watershed, and our office is in La Grande, Oregon.
Great, welcome. Jonas?
Hello, I'm Jonas Moyal. I'm with Green Banks LLC. We manage 4 wetland banks in Oregon.
Great, welcome. Okay, Caitlin Lavelle, Marnie Keller, and then Michael Martin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Caitlin Lovell. I work for the City of Portland's Bureau of Environmental Services. I'm a regulatory strategy manager, and I've also been serving as the city's mitigation banking policy director, trying to stand up multi-credit mitigation, public mitigation banking in the city for federal, state, and local requirements.
Great, welcome. Marnie?
Hi there, I'm Marnie Keller. I'm the Environmental Services Program Manager for the Cow Creek Tribe in the Cow Creek Umpqua Tribe in Roseburg, Oregon. we've been working with DSL to potentially do some mitigation if possible.
Great, thanks for joining, Marnie. It looks like I'm not seeing Michael Martin, but we'll jump to Ron Wairenga.
Yeah, that's right. Ron Wieringa, I'm with Clackamas Water Environment Services. I'm the Deputy Director, and I'm representing Clackamas County and Oregon Association of Counties.
Welcome. Looks like there's a lot of expertise at the table, so thank you all for joining. We've got some agency advisors present today and just want to give them a quick chance to introduce themselves with name and affiliation. So Joy Levitt and Shelley Tatum. So we'll start with you, Joy.
Good morning, everyone. Joy Levitt. I'm with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Habitat Division, and I'm the land use coordinator there. So thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here, Joy. Shelley?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shelley Tatum, and I'm with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I'm the 401 project manager. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and we're really looking forward to all of your contributions throughout this process. So if we could pull back up the agenda, Danielle. Great. Thanks. So we'll just do a quick review of the agenda and just sort of a quick reminder of how to use Zoom. So first, in advance of this meeting, RAC members should have received meeting materials from me, including the agenda. If you didn't receive any of those materials, please let us know so we can make sure that we're sending them to the right email. Just generally, our goal for today is to outline everyone's roles, responsibilities, and expectations, and to help build understanding for the need of this rulemaking and gain a sort of base level knowledge on DSL programs impacted by this rulemaking. To do this is our roadmap. We've just wrapped up introductions, and next we'll hear from Danielle about the rulemaking process, including the purpose of the RAC. Then we'll move to operating principles. These may look familiar as they were pulled from the operating principles that we shared with you along with the agenda in advance of this meeting. We'll spend the most of our time today hearing from Melody and Gray, who will be giving you a little bit more background and purpose in the scope of the rulemaking. They'll share a program overview as well as an overview for the need of the rulemaking. At around 10:45, we'll open it up for interested party comments. Then we'll wrap up the meeting with next steps and end by 11 a.m. this morning. Just a note that this meeting is pretty content heavy, but future meetings will have more opportunities for more robust discussion. For today, we're doing a lot of level setting. So if there are questions you have, please let us know and we'll be happy to respond. Okay, next slide. Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. So we know that a lot of you may not use Zoom as your sort of typical virtual format or platform. So we wanted to just spend a quick minute on sort of a Zoom refresher. So just asking that folks try to stay muted when you're not speaking. That just helps sort of limit cross noise. We are asking that if you have a comment or a question that you raise your hand. If you're on your laptop or your computer, you should be able to hover your mouse around the bottom of the Zoom screen and a menu should pop up for you, and you should see a raise hand option or a reactions option. If you open the reactions, it should give you the option to raise your hand. If you're calling in by phone, I'm not sure that I saw anyone calling in by phone, but in the case anyone is on phone, to raise your hand, you can click *9 on your phone. We are encouraging camera use if you're able. And we have also turned on closed captions for this meeting if they're helpful to you. To do that, just hover at the bottom for that menu again, and there should be a box with 2 C's in it. For closed captions, you should be able to select that and it'll show up, it'll sort of help to show you those closed captions. Just a quick guideline for use of the chat. We know that depending on some circumstances, some folks may prefer to use the chat as their sort of way to participate. We think that's totally great, especially for the use of questions or quick comments. One thing that we are hoping that is if it's sort of a comment sort of turns into a discussion, that we pull it out of the chat and have it sort of in real life. You should have the option in your chat functions to chat everyone. There'll be when you open the chat, there'll be an option to chat everyone, or you can open up that menu and you can choose direct messages to send to folks. We're asking that you generally try to stay within the everyone chat, but if you have a direct question and sort of like a technical question, we're asking that you direct message Danielle for any sort of support you need in there. So, sorry, I know that's sort of a long spiel, but hopefully that helps you all to participate a little better. So I'm going to actually pass it off to our rules expert, Danielle, who's going to provide a sort of a purpose of the RAC and some background. Danielle?
Thank you. Good morning again, everyone. So the purpose of this RAC, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your work days to join us and give us your review and advice. So we're being convened to review and provide input on proposed changes to rule language in Division 85 that covers stream compensatory mitigation, supporting mitigation banking options, an accurate mapping of estuaries on Oregon's coast, and some clarity and minor updates just to make the rule language better and obviously more clear so it's easier to understand. So not sure if everybody's familiar with an administrative rule. Basically, Oregon has statutes called the Oregon Revised Statutes. These are the laws that are implemented by the legislature, and administrative rules implement those statutes. So here's the definition from statute of an administrative rule. So it's any agency, directive, standard, regulation, or statement of general applicability that implements, interprets, or prescribes statute or policy, or describes the procedure or practice requirements of any agency. So the key term there is general applicability. Rules have to apply to members of the public, which means that, you know, interagency policies like how we process an application or process payments or anything like that is not put into rule. So it's the policies that apply to the public. And this is our rulemaking process. So we begin with drafting our proposed rule language by seeking approval to begin the rulemaking, and which is either provided by our executive director or the state land board. And then DSL staff, our program specialists like Mel and Gray, draft the proposed rule language. Then we convene a rulemaking advisory committee for most of our rulemakings. So these meetings are open to the public, and rule language and materials are reviewed by an advisory committee that includes partners and those impacted by the rules. After we finish our rulemaking advisory committee meetings, we then open a public comment period. And a notice of proposed rulemaking is published by the Secretary of State, and a public rule hearing is held midway through the comment period. So generally, we may have 1 to 2 public rule hearings. Sometimes we may have more. And once the public comment period closes and we've reviewed everything, all of our comments that are received, we make amendments as needed in response to the public comments. And then approval to file with the Secretary of State is provided again, either by the executive director of the State Land Board. In the case of Division 85, these are rules that are approved by our executive director. And then are there any questions about the rulemaking process or administrative rules in general? Okay. Not seeing any questions. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Madeline. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Danielle. So now that you've all heard a little bit about rulemaking and sort of the purpose of the RAC, I want to talk a little bit more about what you can expect from participating in this RAC. Some of you may have been involved in RACs before, so this could be a bit of a refresher. But just as a reminder, a RAC is an advisory board. So DSL has begun drafting and revising rule language and has appointed you all as experts to provide advice and recommendations. We really encourage you to attend all RAC meetings and to send an alternate in your stead if you're not able to attend. We've got some more information about that I'll share a little bit later in our meeting. During the RAC process, we will be discussing a sort of a wide range of topics and options. As we do this, we want to encourage you all to sort of work collaboratively to address the issues and options and try to examine them from all perspectives. Try to talk through the pros and the cons and to look to develop consensus on your recommendations. So let's see. So here's what we're asking of you. Perfect, Danielle. So here's really what we're asking of you. So about a week before each meeting, we'll be sending out materials for your review so that you can come prepared to RAC meetings. We're asking that you try to review these materials to better understand the issues or the topics that we'll be discussing at the meeting. We'll also be setting up office hours, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the meeting that you can go to each week if you have questions about content or materials. You all were selected for this RAC because of the unique perspective and expertise you bring to this rulemaking. Your experience will help us to more deeply explore and understand the impacts of the proposed rulemaking. And we're asking that you all work collaboratively in this process so that we can find rule language that meets multiple needs. DSL is really intentionally designed this process to have a diverse set of members with different lived and professional experience and expertise, so different skill sets, different perspectives. And we're looking for sort of a wide feedback on this range of topics. And this goes through August of this year. Sorry, I think next slide, Danielle. So we're looking to hold RAC meetings until August of this year. Each of you really serves a role on this committee, so it's important that you and the community or interest group that you represent is present at these meetings. So if you're not able to join, we really ask that you let us know about an alternate that will be able to participate instead of you, and that you give us at least 24-hour notice that change is being made or that you won't be able to attend. Okay, and some of you may have been on RACs before. For this RAC, we will be using a consensus model throughout the process, meaning that we'll look for unanimous approval for any change or confirmation of the rules. This way we can ensure that we are meeting the goals of sort of multiple groups simultaneously. Consensus really ensures that the process benefits from the unique perspectives of each of you, the RAC members. So we'll incorporate a number of, on our end, on the facilitation side, we'll make sure to incorporate a lot of different tools to help us move towards consensus. We'll look to sort of work collaboratively to find language that's acceptable to all parties. Just sort of a clarification on consensus. When we're looking for consensus, we don't necessarily expect that everyone will be an enthusiastic supporter of every element of the rules, but we do want to find sort of a ground that you can all live or agree, like live with or agree sort of to not oppose. Next slide, please, Danielle. Okay, so just to sort of walk through this a little bit more, these are sort of our expectations about member consensus. We really are hoping that, that you each will participate and that you will sort of consider each other all valuable resources to this rulemaking. It's our hope that you will see each other as like resources to this and that you're all sharing valuable information to this process. We ask that you try to stay solution oriented. We know that there'll be places for disagreement, but we want to look to try to find compromise and that you look for solutions when differing recommendations occur. Really, it's our job as facilitators to build an environment where you can all collaborate and find consensus, but we can always use your support. We have a lot to cover in the next month or in the next few months. So when we reach consensus on any particular item, we'll try to honor that decision and avoid reopening issues once resolved. So as decisions are made, we'll move on to the next topics. In the case that you are challenged to find consensus, we may continue the conversation once we're able to find sort of more supporting information. Next. Great. Okay, so DSL's done a great job of building out the topics that are upcoming. As you can see here, they've built out a schedule from today's meeting in March to our final meeting scheduled in August. For today, this is really the orientation. We'll be talking about background of the rules and sort of the content in there. At our next meeting, we'll be talking about jurisdiction and accurate mapping of estuaries on Oregon's coast and minor proposed updates and removal fill permitting. In May, we'll first provide a background presentation and then begin talking about stream compensatory mitigation framework, policies, accounting protocol, and assessment methods. In June, we will be then discussing the rule language, sort of continuing the topics we talked about in May. And then in July, there'll be other mitigation topics like umbrella banking and in lieu fee programs. In August, we'll look to wrap up and review the draft notice materials. A little later in this meeting, as we're scheduling these out, we'll be asking you about, sort of times of day that these meetings will work best for you. So be ready for that. You'll also notice that all meetings are held on Wednesdays. So just want to make sure that if that's a challenge for you, that you let us know as soon as you can. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so here is your main rulemaking team. I'll be the primary point of contact for this process, so feel free to reach out to me or contact me with any sort of questions or concerns or information or requests. For our DSL team, we have Danielle Boudreau, who is our rules expert. And then we have Melody Rodinko and Gray Wolf, who will also be helping and sort of being your subject matter experts. We will be bringing other DSL subject matter experts along and depending on sort of topics for each of the RACs. Okay, so a little bit about my role. So as a facilitator, my role is really just to help ensure that we're able to have productive and efficient conversations. I will look to try to set an environment where you all feel like you can participate and that your voices are heard. I definitely want to hear from you if I'm not being successful, and we'll be sending out evaluation surveys after each meeting so you can provide your feedback to us. We want to be responsive to any sort of needs you all might have. Sort of task-wise, Maria and I'll be creating summaries that capture decisions made, topics requiring sort of further discussions, and your questions and comments. We'll also be providing sort of that between meeting coordination and communication. Next slide, please. A little bit more. I really have no stake in the outcome of these rules, so I won't be pushing towards any particular solution or outcome. I really am here just to sort of provide structure to your conversation. Any information, so just want to say that I may make some process recommendations, so in terms of ways to meet consensus, that kind of thing, but I won't be making any substantive decisions. Any information that you as RAC members disclose to me in confidence will stay confidential. That being said, just a reminder that, because this is a public body and you'll be sending emails to us, any sort of email may be subject to a public records request. And so, yeah, again, if there are any sort of procedural issues, please let me know. Let's see, moving on to the Department of State Lands role. So the Department of State Lands will be providing technical and administrative support and will be sharing information and institutional knowledge, expertise, and advice to RAC members. They will present on proposed draft rule language and provide the background and context for the rules. Sort of task-wise, they'll be scheduling meetings, so you can look to your calendars for meetings from DSL. They'll help in preparing the materials you get in advance of the meetings and also maintaining the public record. Next. Great. Okay, so we have some operating protocols that we're hoping you all can agree to. We set these so that we can ensure that meetings run sort of as smoothly and efficiently as possible, and so that all members feel respected in the space. And thanks, Maria, for adding the document if you all wanted to sort of review the operating principles as well. The first is really to just act in good faith through all aspects of the RAC, by being transparent, open, and fair. The next is to commit to attending all meetings. I know we've brought this up a couple of times. We know you're all busy and that sometimes life happens, but please do your best to be here or have someone appear in your place. We ask that you be respectful of all other members, interested parties, staff, and members of the public by trying to listen for understanding and sort of through curiosity, sort of through polite disagreement, trying to honor each other's time, and considering sort of each other's perspectives. We also ask that if, a concern comes up for you, that you try to address it during our meetings together. Great. So we will be looking for your feedback, and we know it's a space where there could potentially be disagreement. When there is disagreement, we're asking that you each be active in the solution finding and be sort of responsible for suggesting alternatives. So sort of moving beyond just sort of finding spaces of disagreement, we're asking that you also sort of bring solutions to the table. And then agree to move forward once decisions have been collectively made. Next slide, please. Okay, so outside of these meetings, we ask that you sort of be thoughtful about the way that you communicate, just sort of making sure that your email and written communications are in alignment with the expectations we've shared today. In the case that you do receive any media requests, we ask that you defer first to DSL. When discussing the RAC, we want to make sure that you sort of clarify that any sort of perspectives you're sharing are your own, and that you would look to raise all concerns that you're having at RAC meetings. Next. Great. So as a quick reminder, RAC meetings are public meetings and are open to the public. All rulemaking records, including formal documents, rule drafts, meeting summaries and exhibits, meeting recordings and communications are public record and may be released in response to a public records request. Right, next slide. Okay. So interested parties. Members of the public and interested parties are welcome to listen in to meetings. Interested parties are able to provide comment during the open comment section of each meeting, and we ask that they refrain from participating until that time. Later in the rulemaking process, there will be a formal public comment period as well as a public hearing to hear even more feedback at that time. Okay. I know that was a lot. We've set some pretty high expectations for you all, so I wanted to open it up just to see if there are any comments or questions before we dig into the rules. Okay. Seeing no questions, I will then pass to Melody and Gray.
Great. Thank you, Madeline. So first thing I'm going to do is give you kind of a background, high-level overview of the DSL's removal fill program in general. We know all of you have different levels of experience and understanding working with us, so we wanted to kind of just prime you all with the same basic info about us. And starting with how the department operates legally, like what our legal background is for our program. And that coming from Oregon law, coming from Oregon statute, it specifically states that impacts to waters of the state need to be consistent with the protection, preservation, and best use of those waters. And we also have to make sure, like through our permitting actions, that we're preserving the navigation, fishing, and public recreation values of those waters of the state. Our organ removal fill law was actually enacted in 1967. Just a little background on us. So it's a very old program. It predates the National Clean Water Act, which wasn't enacted until 1972. So that's a real point of pride for us in Oregon. And that also means that our authority is independent of federal authority. That's why we don't see changes to the removal fill program when there are changes to the federal program, because we're completely independent of that. But we do strive for consistency with our federal partners. And in fact, we cooperated through every step of the process of developing the new policies that we're enacting for stream mitigation through this rulemaking. We have to meet the requirements of Oregon law. So there are times through our process where we may not perfectly line up with the feds, but we have a very good working relationship. And at future meetings, you will see Andrea Seeger from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. She was just out sick today. And she was personally participating in the process to develop this policy along with our partners from the EPA. And you can, as you can see on the slide here, we list the parts of statute where the laws that establish our program can be found and where it gives us the statutory authority for this rule making that we're doing. Next slide. So the way that we meet those goals of preserving the navigation, fishing, public recreation, and making sure that any impacts are consistent with the protection, preservation, and best use of those resources is by requiring mitigation for losses of those aquatic resources. And the way we allow those impacts is through a variety of permitting processes. We have general permits, individual permits, and general authorizations. Some of you may be familiar with those different types. They're for different types of projects with different levels of impact. For this rulemaking, we'll be focusing in more on individual permits. And we also have necessary enforcement activities at time under the removal fill law, which is also under this section of rule, but we will not be proposing any changes to that section. Next slide. So in Division 85, the rules that we're looking at during this rulemaking, they actually cover a fairly broad range of topics under the removal fill law, but not all aspects of the program. It does cover what waters of the state are jurisdictional and would require permits or are actions that are exempt from permitting. Specific actions are laid out that are exempt from permitting. This division goes over our permitting process, including how we make our decisions and what information you're required to provide us for those decisions to be made. A lot of detail on what our mitigation requirements and the mitigation process is, as well as details on our mitigation banking program and in lieu fee programs, how those work and what kind of information is required from applicants as they go through those processes. And then the last sections of the rule cover advanced aquatic resource plans and how we operate when we're doing enforcement work under the removal fill law. The first section that I'm going to go over that we are going into more detail on because we're proposing slight changes to them is first the section in the rule on jurisdiction. And while this division 85 doesn't specifically tell folks what information is required in a report when documenting jurisdictional boundaries, so those are delineation reports, what is in Division 85 in this rule is when the removal fill law does or does not apply. And that could be based on either the type of water of the state that an action is happening in, or the volume of material that is being moved due to that action. And this section does explain like the types of waters of the state. So those are broad and include wetlands, rivers, streams that are perennial or intermittent, bays, estuaries, lakes, some large ponds, human-made reservoirs, and also the Pacific Ocean out to 3 miles offshore. So in the permitting part of our program, which is also a section of rule that we're going to be looking at during this RAC process, we focus on the individual permits. So the other types of permits that DSL can offer, or the other types of authorizations, are in different rule sections. So we have general permits, not covered in 85, as well as general authorizations. Those are the types of projects that are often more predictable and so can go under these unique programs. We also in the rule talk about permit exemptions and then individual permits. And all projects have to avoid and minimize their negative impacts, which are steps in the mitigation process. And when mitigation is required for resource losses, it's required by law and by rule to replace both the functions, the values, and the area of those aquatic resources. So for individual permits, this is kind of an example list of the types of projects that we would typically see being authorized under an individual permits. So development projects like housing developments, commercial or industrial developments, as well as new types of transportation structures, roads and culverts, infrastructure in general for building out cities, and as well as some habitat projects, which just can't fit under one of our exemptions or one of our general authorizations or general permits. When something just doesn't fit into those buckets, it ends up in the individual permit world. And now I'm going to hand it over to Gray.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I didn't have my coffee this morning, so I'm sitting here yawning more than trying to hold in yawns more than I can. And this is all interesting information. This is personal information. Anyway, glad to be here and glad to talk to y'all again. Thanks for having us. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about or provide an overview of the mitigation portion of our aquatic resource management program. The overarching goal as we move through, and you'll hear this probably a lot over the next couple of months for mitigation as a part of our Remove a Fill program, is to work towards a zero net loss of Oregon's aquatic resources. And really, zero net loss is exactly what it sounds like it is. We're trying to get to no loss of wetlands or other aquatic resources over time. Another overarching goal of mitigation is protecting aquatic resources, environmental and social benefits. DSL's Remove a Fill program was DSL's Remove a Fill program was established to ensure proper protection where possible and offset where protection is not possible of the state's aquatic resources. So in other words, when we think about mitigation, basically mitigation in a nutshell is the reason for the regulation that we have, right? We're trying to get that offset of aquatic resources. Okay, and so this, the next slide that Danielle's popped up here is really kind of going over the mitigation process in general. And I'll say that we do get some confusion from folks sometimes about what mitigation is versus what compensatory mitigation is. And sometimes folks will conflate those terms, but kind of lining out what the mitigation process is on this slide. Mitigation is a stepwise and sequential process in which compensatory mitigation is it's the final step of mitigation. So another way to think about mitigation that I tell folks often is to picture mitigation as a three-legged stool, right? And the three supporting legs of that stool are avoidance, so avoiding impacts to aquatic resources where possible. The second leg of that stool is minimization, or basically minimizing permanent impacts to resources. And then the third leg is compensatory mitigation, which is providing that offset that Melody was talking about previously for permanent impacts to aquatic resources and their functions and values. So, as you could imagine, what happens when you cut off one leg of a three-legged stool, right? It falls over. So just like a stool that you cut one leg off, in the same way with mitigation for aquatic resources, if you don't have one leg of that stool, mitigation does not work properly. Next slide. All right, so once folks understand how much permanent impact to resources they will need as a result of their project, there are several compensatory mitigation options that DSL recognizes, and those are here on the screen. Permit-to responsible mitigation is typically a form of mitigation that is done on or near the project site. It's different than other options for compensatory mitigation because the responsibility for constructing, monitoring, and maintaining a mitigation site stays with the applicant, so it doesn't get transferred to, for example, a bank sponsor. Both mitigation banks and in lieu fee programs are both projects that sell aquatic resource credits that are generated from restoration, creation, preservation, and enhancement activities. These mitigation projects cover specific watersheds or portions of watersheds, and DSL refers to those areas that these kinds of projects cover as service areas. In general, banks and in lieu fee projects can be pretty attractive to particular applicants because, like I mentioned, the responsibility for the mitigation gets transferred from the applicant to the bank or in lieu fee sponsor by just that simple purchase of credits. And so that becomes an attractive thing sometimes for applicants to utilize mitigation banks and in lieu fee over permittee responsible, for example. Payment in lieu basically means it's a shorthand phrase for payment into the Oregon Removal Fill Fund in lieu of other compensatory mitigation options. And this is really basically DSL collects payments, compensatory mitigation payments, and we will kind of use those in a fund and then dole those funds out, monies out into particular basins to put projects on the ground. For DSL, payment in lieu is the mitigation option of very last resort for a couple of reasons. One is that the Army Corps of Engineers, our federal partners in permitting, they don't recognize payment in lieu. And so if applicants offered to use payment in lieu for a compensatory mitigation option and the Corps did not recognize it, that would mean basically that the applicant would have to double mitigate, and that's not a very attractive option for folks. The other, one of the other major reasons that payment in lieu is our mitigation option of last resort is that it transfers the mitigation option to DSL. And as we know, we have a lack of capacity, and we do find it hard to put compensatory mitigation projects on the ground. So there's a temporal lag or loss in our aquatic resources when we do PIL in most cases. Unlike the Corps of Engineers, DSL does not have what the Corps calls a mitigation hierarchy. This means we do not value or prefer one mitigation option over another. So it's important for DSL at least, and not the Corps, but for DSL, that we keep all of the compensatory mitigation options in our toolbox and use those where appropriate. Next slide. Thanks, Danielle. And I swear I didn't pick this picture. This is me, but just because I'm saying this stuff on the slide, I didn't pick this picture. So unlike mitigation for wetland impacts, when an activity impacts a river or stream, DSL does not currently have a set method for determining how much mitigation needs to be provided. So what this results in is a stream compensatory mitigation being determined on a case-by-case basis. And that really, isn't highly effective, not only for the public and our applicants, but also for our resource coordinators who have to do that day in, day out review of stream mitigation proposals. DSL's wetland mitigation program, on the other hand, which was last updated 6 years ago, is well developed, and it promotes a function-based offset for wetlands of the state. So you'll hear this several more times, I'm sure, throughout the months ahead, but one of the major purposes of the proposed rulemaking is to create a similarly developed and fleshed out stream mitigation program. We also know, just thinking about it generally, that when streams are impacted through various projects, those impacts are often partial rather than complete. So think of impacts that occur due to, for example, a riprap project on a bank versus impacts that occur after removing a stream completely from the landscape. So an ephemeral stream or an intermittent stream removed completely. Those impacts are different. When partial impacts are permitted, a stream will still exist on the landscape. However, its conditions or functions will be changed. This permitting scenario is mostly different than for wetlands. So when wetlands are permanently impacted, those impacts are typically what we think of as total impacts, meaning that both, number one, the area of the wetland, and two, the wetland's functions no longer exist after the project is completed. And that's likely different than most of our permitting scenarios with streams. So a second major purpose of the proposed rulemaking for streams is to update our mitigation protocol to reflect these differences in stream impacts and their compensatory mitigation needs. All right, I'm going to hand it straight back over to Melody to talk about the overview and need of the rulemaking.
Great, thanks, Gray. That was great primer for what we're going to be working on with streams. Good explanations. So the need for the rulemaking, the beginning need is exactly what Gray was just talking about. And that's the second bullet there, the stream compensatory mitigation framework being predictable and effective. It took us many years to develop as I mentioned before, Andrea Seeger from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was part of developing that, as was our partners at the EPA, and then DSL. We all three worked together on developing that. So needing to bring that into rule, that developed policy, was our main need for this rulemaking. But once we were in Division 85, there were some other changes that had been identified just to increase the clarity and the transparency of our regulatory process. You'll notice as we work through the rules that some of them are very clearly just updates to make things clearer. But then we also found, Gray and I found, as we were working through the rule and working through a recent mitigation bank application for an umbrella bank, that there were some gaps that in our guidance on what kind of information we would be asking for from either an umbrella mitigation bank or an in lieu fee sponsor when compared to an individual mitigation bank. So that we really needed to address those once we realized they existed. So that also was wrapped into this rulemaking process. Additionally, we have been reporting out annual losses of wetlands. It's one of our statutory obligations to report to the land board through permitting and enforcement actions and mitigation actions what our net gain or loss of wetlands in the state, like acres of wetlands in the state, are. And we have been reporting negative or near zero, but negative most years. And so we're wanting to address that goal of having no net loss with some rule changes that reflect statutory goals. We also wanted to address that the way rule was written, it limited what kind of projects that once they were in need of an individual permit, because they didn't qualify for like a general authorization, one of the easier permits, they even though they were for the purpose of benefiting habitat, like a habitat restoration process, they weren't fitting into that permit path as laid out in Division 85. And we found some simple solutions for that. So we will be, I would say, expanding things that can be considered habitat restoration projects. So benefiting those beneficial projects. And then finally, with some new technology that is available, we are adding another option for mapping of coastal waters and tidal wetlands. Oh, I guess I kind of already covered that first bullet. So just as an overview, that was some of the need things that we had found. But what we are addressing in those needs is expanding those options for voluntary habitat improvements. And what this does is like simplify their application process, even though they're still going and getting an individual permit, which is, a harder process. We can have some discretion to ease our requirements of information we need for those permits. And I think we found a pretty slick way of doing that. We'll introduce that to you next week, or sorry, next meeting. And then the E-beam is this additional scientifically recognized model to understand the extent of tidal areas. That's something that our jurisdictional experts, our wetland ecologists, can talk about at the next meeting. And then again, we're trying to always improve the clarity of our rules. And so when places have been identified in rule that are perhaps ambiguous or could be misinterpreted, we've tried to address those and do some general like timely updates with terminology and consistency with statute. And so while this rulemaking, it's really targeted that goal of focusing on mitigation. That was our purpose for getting it started, and what most of the time with our RAC will be discussing. We are still, encouraging folks to engage in the other areas that we're talking about. So those permitting processes that we'll talk about at the next meeting. There are probably going to be some recommended changes that come up in those conversations that are kind of beyond the scope of our rulemaking process, and we will be sure to note those changes from you and track that. We have a process of tracking recommendations for future updates, because we recognize that the last time Division 85 was opened up and changed was also for the purposes of mitigation. That was when we adopted wetland mitigation or function-based mitigation accounting for wetlands. And so this time we're doing it for streams. So we recognize that there are probably some also need needed changes in other aspects of this division that we'll take note of and move forward with.
So now if anybody has any questions, Gray and Mel did a great job of explaining things, but we can stop for questions right now.
Thanks. Go ahead, Caitlin.
I have two questions. So I'll ask my first one and then open it up to other questions. And if there's time, come back to my second one. For the in lieu fee, my understanding from the in lieu fee program up in King County is that it is very limited because of tribal input and concerns. Is DSL going to be consulting with the tribes as part of this rulemaking as well?
Caitlin, we'll pass to Melody Gray.
Yes, all 9 recognized, federally recognized tribes in Oregon are offered a seat on the RAC. We do have the folks from the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians have joined in the RAC because we've been working with them on banking. I'm not familiar with the limitations that are happening in King County regarding in lieu fee. If you wanted to talk to me about that offline, I'd be very curious to find out what they are, because it could be relevant here. Right now, DSL is actually the only in lieu fee sponsor, but we would love it if somebody else also wanted to be an in lieu fee sponsor, whether that was a city or one of our tribes. That would be great. So yeah, if you want to explain that more offline, I'd love to hear about it.
Caitlin, thanks, Melody. Caitlin, I know you said you had another question, but opening it up, does anyone else have any questions, or should we jump back to Caitlin while others are thinking? All right, Caitlin, it looks like you've got the mic again.
Okay. For the stream assessment methodology, I know with SFAM, there's concerns that it doesn't apply to large river systems and tidally influenced systems. Are you also going to be revisiting the stream methodology for larger systems for this, so that the mitigation assessment doesn't need to rely on SFAM for those streams?
That's a great question, Caitlin. And that won't be addressed during this rulemaking, but we do have good news on SFAM for large rivers. Our partners up in Washington are actually working on adaptations because they're using SFAM as well. But they recognize through their shoreline program that it was an even regulatorily, it was an even bigger issue for them that it didn't apply to large rivers. So they got a grant to work on essentially alternative methods to applying SFAM to a river that can't easily be, measured with a measuring tape or a stick. And so once those have been developed and published, we'll be able to update and adopt those methods as well. So we've developed a good partnership with Washington when it comes to a tool like SFAM. So not through this rulemaking, but what's great, the way our rules are written, when we make those updates to SFAM, we wouldn't actually have to change rule. We can just expand its use through, the tool being a more expansive tool.
And Danielle, you had in the chat, that's a great point, that the SFAM just stands for the Stream Functional Assessment Methodology for Oregon. Folks who use it often say SFAM, we just do the acronym, but that's what it means. That's a great point.
One of my favorite 4-letter words. So Melody, it would be great when I check in with you on the tribal stuff, if you could give me a preview of what they're doing in Washington. If you have some understanding of that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin, Melody, and Gray. Any other questions? We're ahead of time. So if there are questions that you all have, we've got some additional time to answer them. Okay. Well, seeing none, we'll keep moving, but if anything comes up for you all, please let us know. We will now open it up for interested party comments. We're asking that if you are interested in making a comment and you're an interested party, that you raise your hand. Great, thanks, Ken. And we'll look to keep comments limited to 3 minutes. Looks like, for those who haven't already figured out, you can use the raise hand by hovering and finding the reactions or the raise hand, or you can press *9 on your phone. We'll call you in the order that we see the hands. And when it's your turn to speak, please say your name and affiliation if you have one. And we're, again, just trying to keep these to 3 minutes. Just a reminder that, we are accepting comments during these meetings, but there will be a formal comment period later in the rulemaking that will be added to the record. So Ken, I see your hand now, if you want to go ahead and make your comment.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. The question I have is, with the recent settlement between the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Floodplain Insurance Program, and Endangered Species Act, there are requirements for Oregon to look at mitigation for floodplain conditions. While that's typically outside the jurisdiction of DSL, I think it's really important to think about how your mitigation standards might complement the mitigation standards for floodplains that involve vegetation, water quality, and fish habitat. So it's just a reminder that there are other pieces to the puzzle that deal with aquatic ecosystems that are beyond DSL's jurisdiction, but could be complementary. And keeping that in mind, I think would be valuable. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ken, for that comment. DSL, any response you have? Just appreciating, sort of the considerations of sort of outside of what's going on at DSL, but
Yeah,
Greg?
I can go. Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Ken. I think, Ken, you couldn't be more, spot on. As we do the regulation, as we regulate the waters that we do, we know that our regulation and their resources, there's ripple effects. And so one of the things, I'll just say, one of the things we've been looking at pretty recently, as in the last 5 years in earnest, is kind of multi-benefit projects and multi-benefit banks, right? And trying to incorporate to the maximum extent, that we can, benefits outside of what we typically regulate. So thinking about watershed priorities in a larger context when we kind of cite and construct mitigation projects. And so looking at, kind of large scale, but also local watershed priorities. One of the things, and I think Caitlin mentioned it just briefly, one of the efforts in the Portland area that we've been working on is kind of an interagency group that kind of is discussing how to cite and facilitate the creation of multi-benefit banks, including, banks that can overlap for our 404, removal fill credits, but also for cut fill credits for the city of Portland, ESA credits, fish credits, all of the above. So we are definitely thinking about that. We know that waters touch a lot of things and have a lot of benefit. So thank you for your comment.
Thanks so much, Greg. Okay, any other interested party comments? Okay, seeing none, we're well ahead of time, but we're already up to the next step. So Danielle, I'll pass to you.
Good morning, everyone. You may have noticed in our schedule that we presented earlier today, we didn't have a column for what time the meetings start. And while all of your calendar appointments start for meetings at 9 o'clock, we have had some interest in having afternoon meetings. And with past RAC meetings, we found that there might be conflicts with members with other meetings or other RACs they may be sitting on in the morning. So we just kind of wanted to get a feel for what works best for the majority of RAC members, if a morning meeting starting at 9 works, or if an afternoon meeting beginning at 1 works. And Maria's going to launch a poll for y'all so that we can get this information during the meeting, and we will see what the results are. And if we update things, you'll get updated calendars.
Thanks so much. And just as a reminder, we are looking for just sort of RAC member participation in this poll. So if you're, a RAC member, or and if you're an alternate, maybe just keeping in mind potentially what the RAC member that you're representing may be interested in. If you can't use the poll, feel free to enter whatever your thoughts in the chat as well. Okay, maybe just give it another couple of seconds for anyone who hasn't had a chance to add their time here. It's looking like there's a preference towards morning. Just curious for those folks who pressed afternoon. Is morning not possible for you, or is afternoon your preference?
Speaking for myself and Dana Kurtz, I know she would much prefer to meet in the afternoon, but morning is doable if needed.
Good, thank you. Thanks for that. Caitlin, thanks for your preference. Appreciate that and appreciate the flexibility. All right. Anyone else that chose the afternoon that would not be able to make the morning?
I just noted it was a preference, not a requirement.
Okay, great. Well, that super helps us and recognizing that preference. So thanks all for filling out the meeting poll. Are we good to close it? All
I
right.
would say yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, Danielle, back to you.
Okay. All right. So what's next in this process? Following this meeting, department staff, Gray and Melody, will set up office hours for 10 a.m. on the Monday before each RAC meeting to answer technical and programmatic questions for RAC members. So y'all have the schedule of the topics of what we're talking about. And you have the proposed rule language. So in reading through those rules, and we'll look at providing you with the rule numbers of those rules we're going to be looking at for the upcoming meetings. So that way you can focus on those rules instead of having to try to memorize all of the rules. So that way, if you have any questions about the upcoming rules we're discussing, Mel and Gray can kind of give you some background information and just answer any technical questions you may have. They have done an excellent job of putting in annotations of those major changes and why DSL is proposing those changes. So, if you have questions about those annotations, it's a great time to ask these questions. And I believe these calendars will be coming from Mel, and they're totally optional. We just want to get them on the RAC member calendars, and just provide this for y'all, just to make things easier in the RAC meetings. And yeah. So in next meeting, I will say, nope, not next meeting. I'm not going to say that because I'm thinking meeting 3. So in the next week, we'll be sending out a meeting summary. This will come from Madeline, and along with a reminder to set up a 30-minute interview with our facilitator. And today's meeting recording will be posted. The meeting summary and the meeting recording will be sent out at a minimum by next Wednesday, if not sooner. And then prior to each meeting, I believe Madeline mentioned this earlier, the Wednesday before, if not sooner, a meeting agenda will be sent and any other meeting materials that you may need. So what will happen is the Wednesday before your meeting, an agenda and meeting materials will be sent. And then that following Monday is when Mel and Gray will be holding office hours. So you'll see what's coming up for the next meeting, get an idea of what you need to look at. And then if you have questions, Mel and Gray are available the Monday before. And as always, all of our meeting materials will be posted to our rulemaking website. And just in general, I post everything that happens with the RAC, like all the materials we send you, it's all there for you. And the links that Madeline and Maria send out are linked on our rulemaking page. So if you have anybody that is interested in this rulemaking, and thank you, Maria, for putting that link in the chat, you can send them on to this and they'll see everything that's going on with this rulemaking and other rulemakings that we have. Are there any questions about what's coming up next? All right, thanks. And I'll turn it over to Madeline.
All right. Well, we, ended in record time, so really appreciate you all for your time this morning. Want to do a huge thanks to the DSL staff. Thanks for helping us get ready for this meeting and all the work that you put in. Wanted to say a big thank you for the RAC members. We really appreciate your commitment and dedication to this work. Oh, and Becky, I see your hand. Do you want to go ahead and jump in?
I just had a question. At one point, it suggested that maybe there would be in-person meetings rather than Zoom, and have we decided not to do that?
I think we haven't had an extensive discussion internally, but at this point, there are no plans for hybrid meetings. So even if we decide to do an in-person meeting, we will always have a virtual option because we recognize that travel is not always easy for folks. And if we have it, it's down in Salem. And so, a lot of people are based not in Salem. So we will definitely have a virtual option for every meeting. And if we do have an in-person option, we will let you know ahead of time.
Thanks for that, Danielle. Okay. Any other questions before we close out? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time. Looking forward to some more robust conversations as we move forward. And I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday. So thanks so much.
Thank you.